So welcome everyone, and welcome Scott. Thank you so much for making the time to join us for today's Ask Me Anything session, which is part of our special suite of programs related to the Circular Economy of Food Prize, which is the prize that TFF has partnered with FLAG, the Food Lab at Google Accelerator, Food Lab Accelerator at Google, and their partners to kind of, evoke creative thinking and innovation in the space of circular economy of food. So we put together this call to action for our innovator community to develop, startups in this space, and have been working, together with all of these diverse experts that are part of Google's Food Lab to really, tap into their experience so that we can learn and design solutions that address the challenges our food system faces. And Scott May is one of these amazing, energizing visionaries who has a corporate background, but also gets it and understands that so much innovation is coming from startups. So I would love to turn over to him to introduce himself and the really cool thing that he has built called MISTA, which is based in San Francisco. So Scott, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you have brought to life, which is very relevant for our TFFers.
Great, thanks Christine, really appreciate it, and Happy New Year to everybody. It's hard to believe it's 2020, but here we are. Yeah, so a bit of background. My name is Scott May. I'm in San Francisco. I work for a company called Givaudan. Givaudan is the world's largest flavor company out of Switzerland. And about 2.5 years ago, we embarked on a journey to create MISTA. And MISTA, which means tasty morsel in Sanskrit, is all about helping companies, both large and small. So whether you're a 1 or 2 person company, all the way up to large multinationals like Danone and Givaudan and Mars and others, we help everybody transform the global food system to meet the needs of the future. And we believe that that future is abundant, and that future of food is also very nourishing to both people and the planet. And so that's what our purpose and our vision is. And essentially the way MISTA works is we are a membership model. And so if you're a startup, you would join MISTA, and you can either work out of our space here locally in San Francisco. We have a 7,000 square foot facility where we have co-working space, but even more importantly is we have a very cool food development lab that startups can use, and also big multinationals can use to work on creating that and transforming that future of food. And it goes beyond just a commercial kitchen, but we actually have equipment like pasteurizers and homogenizers that it takes to develop the food. We have bioreactors for doing fermentation, because we know that one of the focus areas of the future is all about using fermentation to really create amazing products, whether it's functionality or taste. And so yeah, that's essentially what MISTA is. And to date, we have almost 30 startups within our membership. And in total, we have about 60 members/partners. And this ecosystem is really set up to help early stage companies like yourselves to transform the future. My background is food science. I've been with Givaudan for 31 years, and so I'm super excited to be on this new journey. And 5 years ago, if somebody would have said, "Hey, let's create the circular economy of food," it was like, "What? What are you talking about? I don't even know what that means." And so it's everyone was talking sustainability, and now we're really at that next step, and where we're talking biodiversity, we're talking circularity, and these are the things that are truly going to transform this food system.
Yeah, amazing. And I want to get into some of those concepts in just a minute, but first I want to touch on a little bit more about what MISTA does, because it sounds really special and unique that you're bringing together these big companies, together with startups, kind of like learning from each other, innovating together, collaborating. And then you're also like bringing together competitors, correct? Like you mentioned Danone, Mars, Givaudan. I mean, maybe you're not direct competitors, but you're all big companies in the food space. So like, how did this come together? I mean, we at TFF are very driven by values such as openness and collaboration. And it's cool to see big companies kind of embracing these too. But tell us a little bit about like how that all transpired, and was that a hard sell to some of these companies, or how did this happen?
Yeah, it's been a journey, and it's a journey for all big food companies. You know, when you think about the past, big food companies were very insular. I call them castles. You know, we had these big castles, and everyone created IP and protected the IP, and IP is still important. You want it and all of that, but everyone has realized that if and when we transform this global food system, doing it on your own is impossible. It's the food system is so interdependent and hyper-connected that you have to have a way to get into that fabric and truly understand, because if you push on one thing, something else is going to happen. And by being in the middle of an ecosystem where you're looking at the entire food system, from ag to processing to CPG and ingredients in the middle there, you have to understand how it all fits together relatively well, so that you can make the right choices, do the right things, and take the right steps. And it's just impossible nowadays for any company. I don't care if you're you know, the biggest food company on the planet, to do it on your own is really tough. And so large food companies recognize this importance of doing it, and so that's why they've been willing to embark on this journey, and even more than willing, but jumping on board with this, knowing that they have to do something different.
Yeah, that's amazing. And we definitely see that with working with the next generation. One of these like leadership skills of the 21st century is all about being able to collaborate with diverse partners and, you know, giving up control, which like the castles used to have, right? And so we definitely share that perspective that to create transformation, you know, you need to be working together and finding these like shared goals. And it's really exciting to see that, you know, the circular economy is, you know, one of these shared goals. And so I want to talk a little bit about what you said, because it really resonated, that, you know, it used to be about sustainability, and now we've kind of like moved past that, because we don't just want to sustain things. We don't just want to sustain the status quo. We want to make things better. So can you really, and we've had a couple of these Ask Me Anything sessions, but it's great to hear from all of the different partners, the different perspectives, but can you explain what circular economy of food means to you and to MISTA and to Givaudan? You know, I'm sure there's some commonality amongst all of them.
Right.
But yeah, tell us what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, like I said, this is new, and you know, I think all of us are figuring out exactly what it means and how to put it in practice. But from our perspective, there's really two things when we talk about circularity and you know, in regeneration, if you will. Part of it is in the ingredients, the materials, the things that we use and how we make the food. So that's one. But then I would also propose that another one is what we call regenerative innovation. And it's actually the process of innovation. And how do you make sure that the process of innovation is just as regenerative as and creating lasting value as is the products and ingredients that you make. And so we have come up with a process that we call regenerative innovation, and it's four things. The first one is all around exploration, and it's not just exploring on your own. It really is exploring in this broader ecosystem. So how do you explore in a way that allows you to see 360 degrees around you? That's the first step. The second step around regenerative innovation is the ability to reflect, because it's one thing to explore, but then you have to be able to say, okay, so what do I see, and how does that relate to everything that we know today, and how does it relate to everything that we want to achieve? And that's a fairly difficult step, because of course, most big companies especially just want to fly down the train. It's like, hey, I have my objectives, that's where I want to focus. And so that ability to then reflect upon what you're trying to do is very important. The third step is integration. And for big companies, that's probably the hardest thing to do, because again, big companies have processes and things, and it's hard to disrupt those processes and ways of working, but it's a very important step. But if you do get that right, then the fourth thing is evolution. And you want to do that continuously, because this isn't a single point in time. Innovation is not, hey, it's a destination. I'm going to be innovative, and when I get there, I'm done. It's truly a journey, and it's that regenerative journey that we want to focus on. So that's the process side of it. On the ingredient side, we're having an amazing time exploring new ingredients that are coming to us that are extremely circular and regenerative. And I'll give you an example. We have a startup company out of Brazil. It's called Labra, and they have they're bringing a new product to market from the Amazon forest. It's called the Barra Nut, and it's called a nut, but it's actually a seed. But what's really cool is that there is so many parts of this thing that can be used in the food production system. So the seed itself is this beautiful seed that when you roast it, it is very nutritious, it tastes great. And then on the outside of the seed is a shell. And that shell in the past was tossed away and for animal feed. But when you taste it, it has 50% natural sugars. It tastes like eating a cookie just by itself. And then you can express the oil, and you can make oil out of it. So for me, it is one of those ingredients that I think best represents the circular part of this, that the way it's grown in and of itself is quite sustainable. And then there are so many components of the ingredient that is regenerative. And not to bash other ingredients, but in comparison to that, is just to compare and contrast, is when you look at the most probably prolific new ingredient that's out there is yellow pea. Everyone is using yellow pea and everything, and it has some challenges because people want the protein out of the pea, and when it's grown, it has about 20% protein. So already you're only using 20% of that particular material. So what do you do with the other 80%? Right. Something has to happen to it. So that's how we view circular ingredients as such, that we're really trying to explore and experiment with.
So I have two, I hope not, naive questions, but one is just related to this great example that you gave us of the Barra Nut, B-A-R-A, is that correct? From Brazil.
B-A-R-U.
B-A-R-U, Barra Nut from Brazil. Okay, so this sounds amazing. You can use the seed, the shell, the oil. I'm sure there's other uses too. Yep. And beyond food ingredients, maybe for materials and things, who knows. But how do you, okay, so now this becomes an exciting crop for the future. Currently it's grown sustainably, I guess, in some type of regenerative agroforestry practice or something. But how do you, once it becomes popularized, keep it sustainable, right? And how it's grown and produced once it becomes a mass consumed product.
Right. And that's a great question. And people reflect upon the challenges that we've had in the past with other ingredients that have become really popular. quinoa, I think, is a good example of something that went horribly wrong, where it's like, oh, this great thing, and it went sideways. And that is part of the entire circular system
process.
that needs to be thought of. And I have another example, if I could. We have another startup that's called Five Sons Foods, and they're bringing a lupin from Ecuador to market. And they've spent a number of years, they've spent more than 3 years just working on the supply chain side of this before they even bring the product to market, which is the right way to do it. Because if you go to market too quickly and you don't have all those things set up, then you're going to run into problems, and it's, the circular system breaks, and it becomes a problem. But what they've done is they have contracted with a number of local farmers who actually need this particular crop, because it's also a cover crop, and it helps regenerate the soil and fix nitrogen. And so there's actually a demand to find these kinds of crops that, taste great. And by the way, this lupin is 60% protein. So boom, you're already starting out with something that is much higher in protein than, let's say, pea. Plus it's the crop itself is a cover crop, and it fixes nitrogen and all these other cool things. And so broccoli growers, for example, in Ecuador, are looking for these things to put into their soil after they grow their broccoli and cauliflower. So yes, and that is what makes it circular, is that you think through the entire system, the entire process, the agro side. And by the way, there is in doing this, we're working with a lot of even in local indigenous farmers who need to find ways of making a living, and this is another way of doing it. So when you think of it, there's usually several things that you can tie into in the raw material, in the finished product, and that's what becomes very circular in its nature.
And I'm going back to what you said about innovation is not a destination, it's a journey. And so it's not about hey, the Barra Nut is going to save the world. It's about, okay, here's all of the possibilities we have here with this crop. And we have to continue to always evaluate and explore, reflect, integrate, and evolve, right? So that we can make this circular. So it's both the innovation, product, if you will, as well as this process of kind of always pushing yourself forward, which in a way kind of answers my second question, which was just going to be about corn. Because corn, maybe at one point could have been considered circular, right? Because every part of corn is used for something, right? It's in materials and sweeteners and, oil that we use, fuel, etc. So I just wondered, I just wanted to test a little bit my thinking here, could that be considered a circular crop, or is that a no-go because it's monoculture and unsustainable? I don't know. Yeah,
I think that's the challenge, is the complexity in this thinking. But I would say that corn, as that specific example, yes, it has a lot of uses on the back end, but on the front end, it is monocropping. When you plant it year after year, it's destroying the soil. So that is not circular in nature. Part of it is, yes, you have multiple uses, but in totality, it is not.
And so that's really interesting too, because in a lot of the discussions we've been having with the FLAG partners, we've been talking a lot about new food products, right? But the interesting thing that I love that you're bringing up, because it fits so well with what we're seeing that TFF teams are doing, is also on the production side and the technologies that can be used around, production systems, better inputs, etc., and how those can play into circular economy of food solutions. And, I guess Yeah, I mean, maybe you can speak a little bit about if you have some examples from the production side, and what maybe if you don't have specific examples, maybe you have some ideas of places where you'd love to see innovation happening to solve specific challenges that could become more circular and how, you know, crops are produced.
I think, are you talking about the production in the growing of the material, or production in terms of the transformation from an ag product into ingredients, or production of the ingredients into?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, again, there is all of these steps that you have to think through, and I think that I'm trying to think through from a production standpoint. We talked about some of the production challenges of ingredients like yellow pea, because the production there is that you're going after something that's in there, but it's at low quantities, and so there's a lot of waste that you need to manage. Now, having said that, maybe there's a great use for that waste, and so you can solve for that, right? And that could be one of the solutions. It's like, hey, there's this thing out there. Corn's a bad one, but let's say yellow pea, and somebody says, I have the best solution for how to use the starch that comes out of this yellow pea in a different way. It's going into the packaging that's then going into the food, and I'm just making that up, but boy, that would be an amazing circular process, right? Where you're taking the pea, pulling out the protein, the rest of it's going into the packaging that maybe is wrapping the food product, and that in itself would be very circular.
Totally. And one of the things that's jumping out to me as you're talking is, like, actually so many different players have a role to play in building these like circular solutions, because there's so many different parts to the process, right? So that's why an organization like MISTA is so special, because you can really look at the whole process start to finish. But yeah, I think that's leads me to my next question, which is at the end of the day, can startups really build the circular economy of food? I'm guessing not. It has to be kind of like an integration of a bunch of different players. And how do you see this kind of working in? Is MISTA really the answer to build the circular economy of food?
Well, I think that startups for sure can bring solutions to the table that can address circularity for sure. Yes, I think in our view of the complexity of the entire food system, can they solve the entire circular part? That's probably a big challenge. Yeah. But that's the beauty, is that we have to find the pieces and parts that we can pull together that can transform this future of food. And yes, that's the intent of MISTA, because again, knowing that somebody over here is doing one thing and somebody over here is doing the other, and if you don't have the ability to put that together and to really do that exploration and that reflection and the integration of how all that works together, it doesn't work. And so that is what we're trying to do, is kind of be that clearinghouse. That's a bad word, but how do you go, oh my God, what you're doing is amazing. If I connect you over here, that's going to be even more amazing. Yeah. And then you can begin to build solutions that are in totality more circular than each one on its own.
Well, exactly. And that's actually too what we're trying to do at TFF with this global collaboration, right? So we have this global community of people working on exciting innovations around a shared challenge of transforming our food systems. And our vision is really that people are collaborating and saying, hey, you're working on this, I'm working on this, how can we bring this together to solve this, etc. And with partners like MISTA, we can really accelerate that happening more and more. And I think your example of pea is really exciting, because I know that like at TFF, what would be really helpful is for people in the big companies to tell our innovator community, hey, you know, yellow peas all the rage right now, but only 20% of it's being used for, you know, alternative proteins. What do we do with the other 80%? And you know what I mean? We can get this strike force of innovators, like either starting to think about that or taking their startup and, you know, applying their technology towards that, etc. I'm sure there's a million problems like that. So how do we get to know those problems from big companies? You know, like how can we start to hear more from you about where we as innovators can add value to building this circular economy of food?
Yeah, great point. And I mean, that's, I absolutely love your platform, because it is a way to address these big challenges, and you could, you know, we can and will put those out there, when we come across them and say, hey, we've, you know, out of these 10 things, we've solved 4 of them, but we still have these 6 things, and, you know, we don't have solutions. So how are we going to do it? Well, let's get it out there, because, and as we progress more and more and more in this, you know, I think that we're gonna be able to identify more of these that we can then articulate very well to the communities and say, guys, these are big problems. Can you help us? Do people have big ideas? And, you know, and then, yeah, so I absolutely think that it is tools like what you guys have, that can certainly help address that, and working together where you're putting the challenge out there, and then helping MISTA can help then connect it together, and then the big food companies can roll it out, and they have scale, and I mean, that's how it all works together.
Exactly. And I think also in a way that is empowering to startups, because I do know from talking to entrepreneurs in our community, and remember, we're specifically working with like millennials and Gen Zs, but there is this kind of, you know, maybe they've watched too many episodes of the show Silicon Valley, but there's this fear of like, if I work with a big company, they're going to take my idea and either like steal it or ruin it. And, you know, and I think we need to change that mindset, because a lot of the impact we need to make in food and ag is going to be through big companies and startups and entrepreneurs all working together. But we have to find a way to do that well, and where everyone is benefiting and sharing, you know, right? So that's a challenge.
Yeah. And so that's a great point, and we have this conversation all the time, and that's one of the values that we can bring is that MISTA can be that bridge of trust between the early stage companies and the later stage companies. We know both of them. My partner on the MISTA platform, his name is Danny Rubenstein, and he was the original partner at Naked Juice. And since then he was COO at Awala, scaled that. So he's an expert at early stage companies, and he brings that kind of mindset. And so, you know, it's this nice blend of capabilities that we put together to try to help these companies and understand how they can then work with big organizations. And I always tell early stage companies that, and this isn't black and white, but usually big companies have probably had the idea somewhere internally at the past, but because ideas are not their problem, right? It's getting things out there, because usually the ideas die because, you know, the power of no in these big companies, and everyone's afraid, and if, you know, all these things that they have to go through, and that's why they struggle. And early stage companies don't have that same thing. And so it's usually not, you know, you could show them 100 ideas and they'd say, wow, those are all great, but they can't execute against them. So it doesn't really matter. So that's our approach. It's yes, you have to be careful with your IP, and you don't want to share too much, but in a nutshell, that's the way we look at it.
And I'm guessing you have to do some education back to the corporate partners too, because although you are a team of visionaries who built this, I mean, I used to work for a big company, and I know, like, you get the legal and everybody involved, and oh, we can't budge on this, you know, partnership agreement and these terms and conditions, etc. So you also, I guess, have to like get them to realize, you know, a little bit of the give and take that comes into this. Yeah,
and that's that bridge of trust again, is that you know, we can turn around and go to the big guys and say, look, stop it, right?
Yeah.
If you're happy with where you are, then just keep doing what you're doing. But if you want to do something different, then you're going to have to also do something different, and let us help you do that, right? Because the same old way of wanting to protect and own and all that stuff, and with we try to do a good job of having partners on the MISTA platform that are already thinking that way, because we want to make sure that this ecosystem remains open and transparent, and so we don't want any bad actors in there, because it's gonna poison everything. And so I think that's why we've been that's why we love the partners we have, is that they've already had that mindset.
They see the vision. And we have some questions coming in on the chat. Before we get there, I just wanted to mention something that I've been thinking about a lot, because, by the way, like, my background and area of expertise is around kind of innovation policy and IP, open IP strategies. So I set up an open licensing framework for a company I used to work for. And I also have studied extensively the music industry and some of their business models, right, that have been super disruptive, not only in terms of like how we now get music instead of having to buy big CDs, and well, maybe none of the people in TFF have ever had the experience of buying a CD, but I did in my lifetime. But now, of course, you can buy single songs. But there's also a really interesting label from Canada called Monster Cat. They're in the dance music genre, but they actually have started very analogous to tech, as like some hobbyists in a dorm room, and they sign single artists on, right? Instead of like putting like a big effort behind a mega star, they're like, our brand is our label, we're going to sign on these single artists. It allows them to be much more like experimental and have this really like unique product line that's global and very interesting. And then, like I said, they kind of stand for their label of being this like open and collaborative community of artists. And I keep thinking, like, what would Monster Cat look like in food and ag? What if a food company was like innovating their product line in this way, right, through all of these startups and fostering this kind of remix culture? Because Monster Cat also put out like a really interesting like IP manifesto, which is again very next gen, because digital natives have grown up with this remix culture. But anyway, I'll park that. But I think that there's a lot of cool things we can learn from totally different industries who are like shaking things up, getting big companies and different entrenched ways of doing things, into new paradigms, which is what we need. So I'm going to take some questions from the participants. So Lucas, who I believe is from Brazil, if I remember correctly, but he can correct me if I'm wrong, but he said, this is the point, what to do with waste, yellow pea starch waste, for example. How can we reimagine a way to redesign yellow pea production? Like if we obtain a yellow pea that keeps more starch inside the pea so that it incurs less waste. Instead of thinking of the problem of waste output, why not think about reducing waste output caused by a transformation in raw material production, tech to change the production way of the ingredient, etc. So yeah, basically, he said, he's from Brazil. So I think that's an interesting question. It's like, it's uprooting how we ask these questions, right? Not just having the like, oh, we need to repurpose this waste, but it's like, what if waste is never even produced? So that's something, again, like, what do you think about how we can train ourselves to think like that?
Yeah, and so I love the question, and I love the thought process, because that's exactly one of our challenges is that even in the thinking at the very beginning, we start from the old paradigm and we go, oh, okay, we're in the old paradigm, so what do we do with this waste, and how do we upcycle this, and how do we get rid of it, and I think that when we apply this regenerative innovation process, where you're continually exploring and reflecting and integrating, that it, hopefully you can get to this point where you begin to think, oh wow, okay, well, why are we even doing it that way? And of course, the challenge with food is that you could, let's say, you could go in there and either using CRISPR or even GMO, and you could modify the pea so that it's like, well, let's push it so that it starts where it's growing, where it's producing 60% protein instead of 20. But then you have all these other challenges, right, with consumers like, oh, I don't want GMO, so I don't want that, and I only want real food, and so it is quite complex in how you think through all of that. Now, personally, my belief is that as we progress and people stop getting so hung up on GMO being one thing and being evil, that using CRISPR and other technologies, biotechnology solutions, that we will be able to go down some of these paths, and we'll be able to flip this on its head as more and more consumers understand the benefit of doing some of these things, right? That we're not out to just meet the needs of some giant corporation and they're trying to poison everybody, but truly trying to solve some of the big food challenges. So that's the way I would look at that.
I think it's a great point. And that's something too that we have some modules on the digital labs around, is like also how you position your innovation, and not just talking about the attributes of your technology, but really the problems that you're solving. So if you are indeed preventing waste from occurring, like that's a great like product attribute in your story and in your marketing materials to like position. And like you said, you can get that out there in the forefront and overcome potentially concerns, right? And also engage in dialogues with these diverse partners that we need to get to. So yeah, great question. I think another thing too, just to the question from Lucas, is, like just always pushing ourselves as innovators to think past the obvious questions, right? And to really push ourselves to think like, is it just about repurposing waste? How do I prevent it in the first place? That's part of the systems and complexity thinking. So
Yes.
Jason wrote, are we currently considering carbon footprints as part of making food more circular? If not, should we be thinking about them within circular modules, and how would it be best to include them? And Scott, I'll definitely let you answer this, but I just wanted to say that actually in the submissions for this challenge, there is a template that all teams have to fill out, which give criteria for evaluating the circularity of your solution. And indeed, carbon footprint is one of the criteria that we are asking people to include. But I'll let you add to anything there that you want to.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add besides yes, absolutely. We, in the look, the global food system is probably the biggest problem in our world right now, right? It is the biggest creator of everything, right? We all know that. So yeah, having solutions for sequestering carbon and carbon footprint and all that, absolutely. And it's huge, right? We have to solve it.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Jenny says, how can tech companies indirectly involved in the food and beverage space find successful collaboration? That's a great point, because yeah, there's packaging companies, there's, all kinds of like these related areas that, can be brought into these discussions and should be brought in. So how do we do this successfully?
Well, it depends on what kind of tech we're talking about, but I'll give you some examples. We definitely are looking for tech companies to be part of the MISTA ecosystem, because we believe that this is a key part of everything we do in terms of how we understand consumers. So I'll just give you an example. We have a startup out of Italy called Timus, and they are a neuroscience company, and they're understanding what consumers want and don't want at a deeper level than ever. And so I think, having the ability to understand consumers better is also part of the circular piece, right? So because we're wasting a lot, 90% of the products that get launched fail, and that's a huge waste in and of itself. So you could argue that, wow, if you could cut that in half, I mean, it's a lot less waste then, because it's a waste of all resources and all kinds of stuff. So there's that kind of technology. There's technologies about really truly understanding what it is that consumers want and that would work. And we're super excited to be working with a number of these, because I think it is such an important part of the ecosystem. So I don't know what the technology is they're referring to, but I would say there's lots of opportunities to get involved from the tech side.
Awesome. That sounds like a really cool company in Italy. I'd love to hear more about them. But Jenny, definitely, if you have specific questions, feel free to ping those over in the chat or contact us directly at TFF and we can follow up with Scott. Okay, so Sajiv is asking, and I think this is a great question, how do you find the balance between truly disruptive innovations, which have a really long realization roadmap, say 2030 or even 2050, compared to these immediate innovations which have more short-term fixes? Is it all about the economics when it comes to corporations, or are we willing to play the waiting game to really facilitate big transformational changes?
Wow, great question. Love it. Yeah. And I just had this discussion yesterday with my board, because it's I don't know if anyone has seen the recent data, but there is now more money coming into the food and ag system from venture than the research dollars that are put in from big food companies. So and so I think that is going to change the game, because if we look at let's just look at cultured meat. Cultured meat didn't start from big food. Cultured meat started from the biotech industry, and it started from venture funding, right? One of the first companies was Memphis Meats, came out of IndieBio. Today, not almost all of the cultured meat companies are being supported and funded by venture. And they are willing to, they know it's going to be a game changer. It's each company, I mean, at a minimum, you're talking $25 million. And it's a huge investment. And so the venture companies are willing to put that money in and wait for the return, because they know when it happens, it's going to be enormous and it's going to be so disruptive. And big food companies, their model just doesn't work like that. Yeah. Right. So they can't wait that long. So it's very interesting, this transition we're seeing, that in the old days, everything was driven by big food and the investment in research, and now it's flipping the other way. And so I believe that we are seeing patient capital out there, especially impact investors that know that this is the right way to go, and they're willing to play the waiting game. Of course, you have to find the right investor, because there's bad investors out there too. There's bad venture money, so not all venture money is created equal. But for sure, it's out there.
For sure. And it's really interesting you're making this point, because indeed, like, venture money is exciting and does fund, a lot of like the big transformational innovation. That said, it isn't usually perceived as patient capital. And so one of the things I've at least always thought is that the venture model isn't perfectly suited to food and ag, where time horizons are longer, where there are consumer acceptance issues and regulatory acceptance issues, etc. So your typical VC isn't looking at they're looking at a 5-year exit, and that's not really common for a lot of companies in this space. So you're also saying that there's this new type of venture money coming in that is focused on longer horizons and really big game-changing impact. Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. And
yes.
Yeah. And is that happening everywhere, or is that a San Francisco thing?
I think it's happening for sure in the US, and it's happening in Europe. Well, Well, and even there's been some investment in Asia in this space too. So I think it's happening everywhere, and that's the, you know, it's the difference, I would say, between, not to bash any venture people, but it's the difference between you know, a venture fund that used to do tech, and now there's like, oh, food's exciting, I want to go into food, and they try to apply the same model, versus funds that are truly you know,
built with understanding.
Right. And they have people in there that understand the food system, and they understand the length of time, right? That venture funds are going to invest in, knowing that's going to take a long time, especially with some of these technologies, to get there.
Yeah, very good point. I think one of the things we're also trying to do at TFF is like build bridges with the venture community, because, you know, a lot of times the money is going to like the expected places. And what we get to see is that there's a lot of innovation happening in all parts of the world, even in high tech, you know, food and ag related sectors. And so we want to start to get these innovator communities, you know, noticed and funded, right? And so this is going to be also part, we think, of the big transformation that's going to happen in food and ag, is from the ground up innovation, right? And yeah, that's exciting. So one question from Francisco says, and I don't know if this is an area of expertise that you have, but let's see. He says, what are the biggest challenges in the milk supply chain in Latin America? And what do you consider could be the next steps to solve them? I heard about some startups like Mitero based in Los Angeles, which tries to get more value from spoiled raw milk. I don't know if that's anything you have expertise in or could speak to.
Interesting. I guess I don't have enough specifics in that particular case.
But dairy is interesting because there is cell ag happening, like, you know, creating milk without the animal, but at the same time, there's
Perfect Day.
Yeah, Perfect Day, Clara. I've also been reading that there's also a lot of innovation in ag tech happening right now for dairy and livestock. So it is like one of those interesting things, like what is the future of dairy going to look like, and, you know, dairy farming. And yeah, so I think like this is again where I find it very interesting to learn from our innovator community, who really like understand what's happening in their markets around the world and are innovating to specifically address those challenges and the opportunities there.
Yeah, I mean, just I would say what I am more familiar with probably is you know, let's say innovations and technologies in plant-based dairy that you know, right now there's a huge gap in terms of the nutritional quality of real milk versus plant-based milk, and so I think the opportunity there is to close that gap and find regenerative circular ways to create products that are truly delicious, nutritious, and can also be more regenerative and sustainable for the world than let's say real milk production. So
I feel like we need another AMA with you, just where you can start throwing out these problems for us to solve. Because like already I'm like, we could run a whole challenge on this. Like, how do we improve nutrition in plant-based food products? Like, go.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's a really, really interesting point. How do we, you know, develop circular economy for yellow pea? Because that is increasing production everywhere. A lot of people are focused on that. So I think there's so many things in it. For me, that's a big takeaway of how do we build a circular economy of food with corporations? Well, we need at TFF and also with our innovator community to embed ourselves into dialogue with big companies so that we understand where these innovation opportunities lie and can, you know, collaboratively work together to solve them in a way that makes sense, right? And pushes us towards this process of innovation, which I think is such an astute point. I hope everyone there heard it. The 4 parts of the innovation journey: exploration, reflection, integration, and evolution, right? Those are, I want to make like, we're going to make a TFF, you know, MISTA branded poster of that, because innovation is not the destination, it's a journey, and we have to always be on that journey with that process. So in the final like 10 minutes, just kind of, I don't see any more questions coming in. So, oh wait, one more, I think. Okay. What is the best way? This is a good question to end on. And then I have one more. But what is the best way for large companies to support startups through a true partnership outside of funding?
Yeah, excellent question. So what we find is the best way to support is in truly being open, and we have opportunities to, let's say, share some of the capabilities. It could be what we're trying to do at MISTA anyway is engage with the Givaudan's, Ingredion's, Danone, and Mars, because we have thousands of amazing scientists. We have pilot plants. We have the ability to scale. And so that's constantly what we're trying to do is to bring all of that to bear, to partner with early stage companies. And so I that's how I would see it. Now, having said that, it is super hard to do, because it usually it distracts from what the big company is trying to achieve. And so again, that's part of the role that we play at MISTA, is that bridge of trust, is to help them understand why they should do this, and how they should do it in a way that is meaningful. And again, it comes back to the regenerative innovation model, is that there has to be something in it for both. Is that by doing this, also the large food company can, because it's exploration for them, and they should be reflecting upon what it is they're doing and integrating that back into everything they do. Not to steal the idea, of
course,
that's not what I'm talking about. But again, if they think of it that way, then there's a legitimate reason of why they're doing it, because it's like, oh, I need to have, I'm spending my time and there's value in it, and it's regenerating itself, because I'm gonna get value out of that.
I mean, this is amazing. And I mean, there's so many lessons to be learned by not only our entrepreneurial community, but I think the food and ag industry and all the companies who are part of it, from the work that you're doing in building this bridge of trust and fostering these new types of exploratory innovation. And one thing I know Danone is one of your partners, but they mentioned that they've made available this open source library of microbes for fermentation, which I think is also really cool in fostering collaboration. It's hey, innovators, go dive into that. If you're developing some type of fermented food product, they have this large, huge open source repository of information that you can use, so you don't have to start from scratch. And again, that's very much in line with our values at TFF,
yes,
openness and collaboration. So it's cool to see initiatives like that. So we really hope to see you in Malaysia at our summit. So no pressure, but definite pressure. But if there's, as these teams are in the final stretch of this year's TFF Challenge and considering to join the Circular Economy of Food Challenge, which they have the chance to, when they submit their pitches, last, piece of advice or thing that you're looking for, just word, that you want to leave them with as we close out this amazing and very energizing call.
So my word is fearless. And so my wife and I, we talk about fearless innovation all the time. And what this is not easy. What this is breaking everything. And it does take fearlessness to do this, because people will say that can't be done, it's impossible, why are all these things. And so my advice is just stay in that fearless side of the equation, because living in fear it doesn't do anybody any good. So that would be my advice. And I'm super, super excited what you're doing, Christine, with TFF and the circular economy. And I am just so excited. And I hope to be in Malaysia. And I hope to see these amazing people producing some amazing ideas.
Well, this is just the beginning of the journey. I think that, you know, we have this challenge, but there's so much more to come in terms of like our collaboration and our innovator community collaboration. And we just want to thank you. We have had, you know, participants from every part of the world on today's call, all the way from Australia, Asia, through to the, you know, Europe, Africa, all the way to North America. So thank you so much for making your time today and sharing all of these great insights. And we're all super pumped to deliver amazing innovation towards this challenge and to work together with you and the Flag partners on, you know, transforming our food systems for the future. Thanks again for your time, Scott, and thanks to everyone for participating, and we look forward to chatting soon. Good luck to all participants in the final stretch of the challenge. Bye. Bye.
Thanks. See ya.